Washington. Congress would allocate more than $120 million in additional money to help cover the escalating costs of protecting the Trump family and Trump Tower under a bipartisan spending agreement that appears poised to pass this week. About half of the money, nearly $60 million, is earmarked for the Secret Service, with most of it going toward protecting the president while he is traveling, and security for Trump Tower in New York City, according to legislation being circulated on Monday. Another roughly $60 million would be set aside in a rare provision to reimburse localities, like New York City and Palm Beach County in Florida, that have incurred extraordinary law enforcement personnel costs associated with protecting Mr. Trump's residences since Election Day. The additional funding, which comes after weeks of mostly behind-the-scenes lobbying, reflects the tremendous costs associated with protecting the lifestyle of Mr. Trump and his family, and it is likely to provide relief to those who have borne the brunt of the effort, if only for the next 5 months, when the current fiscal year ends. The Secret Service has been particularly strained as it tries to keep up with its new protectees, who include a First Lady and a son living at Trump Tower and Mr. Trump's frequently traveling adult children. The agency had requested additional money earlier this year. The legislation provides the Secret Service with $34 million. The increased cost of physical protection of Mr. Trump for the rest of the fiscal year. The money could be used flexibly to protect the first family in New York and when it travels. The family's travels, from business trips to Vancouver and Dubai by Mr. Trump's adult sons to ski weekends in Aspen, Calo, and Whistler, British Columbia, by his daughter Ivanka have become a constant point of criticism among Democrats. Another $23 million would go specifically toward covering the costs of outfitting Trump Tower with the necessary equipment and personnel, as well as to rent space inside the building for agency personnel, according to a Department of Homeland Security official who was familiar with the funding bill but was not yet authorized to discuss it. Mr. Trump has not returned to the tower, his primary residence and the corporate headquarters of the Trump Organization, since Inauguration Day, but his wife, Melania, and son Barron have been living there full-time. The agreement also funds several significant one-time costs associated with presidential protection, predate the Trump administration. Among them are $50 million. The installation of long-awaited White House fence segments intended to improve security at the Executive Mansion, and $13 million to make overtime payments incurred during last year's presidential campaign. In total, the Secret Service spends more than $750 million of its $1.08 billion budget on protective operations. That includes not only protection of the White House compound, Mr. Trump, his family and other current and former top government officials, but also security for visiting foreign dignitaries and the United Nations General Assembly each year. The agency declined to comment on the legislation. Aside from the Secret Service, the biggest beneficiaries under the agreement would be New York City and Palm Beach County, where Mr. Trump and his family have spent the bulk of their time away from Washington since Election Day. Bedminster, NJ, where Mr. Trump owns another golf club and is expected to spend time in the coming weeks and months, would also be eligible to apply for the funds. Congress had previously approved $7 million to reimburse local law enforcement the costs of protecting Mr. Trump between Election Day and the inauguration. The new agreement will provide that money, plus $20 million for the same period and $41 million for the period from Jan. 20 until the end of the fiscal year. Although the federal government does not otherwise reimburse costs of state or local law enforcement activities in support of the United States Secret Service Protection Mission, the legislation reads, these funds are being provided in recognition of the extraordinary costs borne by a small number of jurisdictions in which a residence of the president is located. More than 100 days into Mr. Trump's presidency, those jurisdictions said they have yet to see any federal money and are still awaiting instructions on how to apply for the bulk of the reimbursement. New York City has shouldered the heaviest cost since Mr. Trump was elected. James P. O'Neill, the police commissioner, wrote in a letter in February to the state's congressional delegation. The police department had spent $300,000 a day protecting Trump Tower between Election Day and Inauguration Day, and $127,000 to $145,000 a day since then, on top of other costs. In Florida, home to Mr. Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office has said it was spending an additional $60,000 a day in overtime when Mr. Trump was in town. He has visited 7 times since Inauguration Day, spending a total of 25 days there. And Bedminster, about an hour outside New York City, said its 6-person police force spent $300,000 protecting Mr. Trump when he held meetings at the club during the presidential transition period. Later this week, Mr. Trump is scheduled to return to the New York City, the first time since taking office to commemorate the 75th anniversary of a World War I naval battle. It is unclear if Mr. Trump will stay at his Trump Tower triplex or return to Bedminster, which is likely to become a more frequent presidential retreat as the weather warms. The federal reimbursement, which was championed by lawmakers representing the localities, was greeted as a relief, even as there were concerns that it may prove insufficient. The legislation also specifies the funds are to be used for reimbursement of costs incurred before Sept. 30, the end of the fiscal year, meaning that Congress is likely to have to take up the issue again. We are getting what we are owed, Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York said in a statement thanking New York's congressional delegation, helping secure the funds. That's good news for our city and the hardworking police officers faced with this unprecedented security challenge. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office declined to comment on Monday, but Representative Ted Deutsch, Democrat of Florida, who represents parts of Palm Beach County, said he was grateful the county's taxpayers would not be on the hook. Still, he said, the agreement provided only a temporary solution. This is an important step, Mr. Deutsch said. But now and by the end of the funding bill, we have to have a discussion about whether it is appropriate the president to bill the taxpayers trips to his private club.